spite of the bitter bleakness of the winter, spring that year for none was like an expected but unprepared for visitor. It seemed hardly a day after school was out in early February, and Sue's come running home with the news that she'd passed her 8th grade examination, that it was a red, windy sunrise in early March, and Millie was crying, "Look, everybody, look, spring's a-comin'. The cedar tree by the little barn's a-smokin'." The children ran to the kitchen door, and Nun looked too, and saw, spiraling up and spreading slowly outward in the still morning air, the blue smoke of the cedar tree that Millie had not seen for 2 springs, for the tree smoked only once in a spring, and then for a little time only. Some people lived and died and never saw a smoking cedar tree. They were rare things to begin with. Sue Annie had none, and John only a few in all his timber lands. And Millie, when she saw the smoke from her tree, felt as lucky as if she'd found a 4-leaf clover.
Well, first, I write it not on a loose-leaf notebook, but in notebooks like this, all fastened together. I think there are hundreds out in the chicken house back there. Then, that's only the beginning. I type what I have written when I have several books ready. I type them, and those sheets become my worksheets, I hope. And they too are only the beginning, because after I read it, I find I've used unneeded adjectives and adverbs. I have repeated, or sometimes I've explained too much. So mark it out. Other places are not clear. I could have used better language. Rewrite it. And this goes on and on and on. Or in the case of the Dollmaker, I cut off the first, I think it was about 100 pages of typed copy. I thought about that and decided, well, to myself, if you can write any at all, Harriette, worth a cent, you don't need all that. They should, the reader could understand that from a different beginning. So that these books, they are a beginning, but there's so much to do between the book and a manuscript fit to send an editor, they could scarcely be called a beginning. Writing, I don't know, it's mental, I suppose, in a way, and emotional, but it still tires me physically. I try to get up as early as possible and write in the mornings and do housework, cooking, and everything in the afternoon. You can imagine what my house is like. But if I get too tired physically, I just can't write. So I do it the first thing, and if I'm too tired physically to do all the housework as it should be, I'm just too tired physically. My husband has an electric typewriter. He will have nothing to do with my manual, and I don't like his. That little whirring, murring noise it makes when you turn it on, you know, go in and see what it's like. It bothers me. And it's more difficult to use, I think. This typewriter and I get along fine, or so I think. Our father had taught school a while, but the pay was so low, and they discovered oil in Wayne County, he became a tool dresser or driller. and then the fields were drilled out, and he came to Burnside to the veneer mill because his family was getting bigger and bigger. We had, I don't know, 25 or 30 acres on the hill, but we always had a big garden, a milk cow or two, chickens, and our father set apple trees, peach trees, so we had our own fruit and everything. I graduated from high school shortly before I was 16, and by the time I was 18, I had a one-room school in a remote part of Pulaski County in a bend of Cumberland River. And I had a great time there. It was a small school. The children were quite well behaved. They weren't accustomed to books. Not, most homes had a Bible, period. And I thought I will have to take it out of the book. So one morning, walking to school, this was winter, and I broke no evergreens, the cedars and pines there were in different places. I broke about 25 twigs from a variety of trees. Sycamore, dogwood, elm, hickory, white oak, black oak, willow. Some I didn't know. I didn't know all the difference between the notes. The oaks. So when time for the dreaded adjectives and verbs came, I took out a twig and I said, now look, children, let us think of this twig as a noun. It's something. It's a twig. And now let us tell how it looks. Is it brown, dark brown? And does it have real sharp, slender buds? Or are the buds fat? Is it a dark brown twig with fat bulbs? And I never finished because one boy spoke up and said, that's no noun, that's the twig of a black oak. So they knew and I'd had 6 hours of botany. I wasn't certain of all the twigs I had broken. They knew every one without a leaf. It was winter, the children did. And I learned a lot. And I enjoyed it until I was offered a job in Louisville public schools. So away I went. I soon discovered this job was not for me. Well, as soon as the semester ended, I left. I'd made up my mind that I'd rather do anything than try teaching again. The principal spent a lot of time watching me through the glass door. And one of the boys had broken my glasses into smithereens. And this and that. I might have been fired, but in any case, it wasn't a good job. Had I really wanted to teach, I would have gone to Pulaski, Wayne, Cumberland counties, got down on my knees before the superintendents and asked them for a one-room school in a quiet place where the children hadn't learned all the mean tricks these had. And I didn't consider it risky at the time. I felt if I didn't write, I would just die. I also felt that my death would come quicker trying to teach in Louisville. And I can't say, I didn't give her a chance to fire me or ask about next year, and I never asked the principal or anyone. When the last gong sounded, there were teachers' meetings and this and that. I didn't go to any of them. I just left. And in a way it was risky, but perhaps I was more suited to be a waitress or in a bookstore than as a teacher. I don't know. I did all right. And I migrated. My migration was short in miles. I only went from Louisville to Cincinnati. But it was big emotionally and in the change of life. I was no longer a coward. I don't know whether I was braver or I was just desperate. But I decided I would work just enough to keep alive and give, you see, I had not majored in English, and give my time, part of my time, to reading some of the great novels of which I had heard, and great stories. They would help me learn, and I would write, and in what time I had to, I would work. The work was respectable, but it's not the kind of work that a mother whose daughter has a college degree would want to do. I worked as a typist sometimes. I was fairly good at it, not too good. Also at waitressing, which really shocked the family, but it was nice, short-time work. You couldn't have held me when I placed my first short stories with what they call little literary magazines. They paid only in free copies. Some of them were typescript. And glory. And the glory was what I wanted. And then in 1936, oh, life was wonderful. My first novel, Mountain Path, published by Cavici Freed, which was a good company. It didn't earn a lot of money, but the reviews were good by everybody except my immediate family. My mother was horrified or disgusted with the book. Her one thought was, or her main thought was, Harriette, the neighbors will think that you've fallen in love with a moonshiner someplace. Why couldn't, and one sister said, why couldn't you have written about nice people? Well, I figured these people were nice. It was a depression. Now, the people I boarded with, at least if they were moonshining, I didn't know about it. But moonshining was, in a sense, so against the law, an honest way of earning a living. A more honest and greater, well-educated men have used at times. That was published in 1936. I never had a book published till 1949, 13 years. You see, my husband and I, Harold B. Arnow, fell in love. He was an ex-newspaper man. He'd worked about 5 years in Chicago as a reporter, and that was during the gangster era. Not only gangsters, but he'd seen, I think, too many men dead on the sidewalk where they'd frozen to death. There wasn't a great deal of help for the starving at that time, though it was coming. Anyway, we came down with a terrible disease, and there were books written by people with the same disease. I remember one was The Agony, and another one was called We Took to the Woods. It was people who wanted to get away from it all. Depression, everything. and the war in Europe was beginning to bubble. We were hearing more and more of Hitler and Mussolini. And we were married in March 1939. And by September, we had bought a boundary of beautiful land on the Big South Fork of Cumberland River. Beautiful valley with about 150 acres of land. I dreamed mostly of all the writing I would do and the botanizing. More than anything, I would write, no more stopping to take a job. The simple life of subsistence farming would give us food, shelter, and leave plenty of time for writing. We soon discovered the simple life was not simple. The flowers from Buttes near the tops of the ridges, all the way down to Virginia creeper near the Big South Fork, bloomed, withered, and died with scarcely a glance from me. There wasn't time. In addition to visits from people who lived around us, late spring brought many of the relatives and friends husband had invited. I remember one woman, city-born and bred, who talked often of how great it was to have fresh vegetables from the garden, and all for free. When she said that word, I could make no answer. Worse was a close relative who came and spent about 2 hours on the place. When leaving, she looked at me and said, "Harriette, I think you're crazy." And I could make no reply to get. Early July brought other complications. First, to put it politely, our finances were depleted. Most of the last had gone for fence and men to help my husband build the fence. And almost the last bit of money had gone for fruit jars. Blackberries were beginning to change from pink to red. Neighboring women and children were already picking and canning huckleberries. I picked only a few. The garden and other work left little time, and no matter if I worked from daylight into lamplight, I was never able to manage in that simple life as smoothly or as well as the other women around me did. They did all I did and more. We did not have a large family, one child by then. I had written almost nothing. I had started a novel about a man with an obsession to catch a big red fox. I'd written very little. And we were contributing nothing to the war effort. Others were leading. So husband went to the city after a while to try it this time. He'd had enough, I think, of Chicago, and became a newspaper man again.
Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me.
Like other good hill wives, I had to wait. It was several months before he could get housing. Detroit was a place where whole families at that time were living in one room. It was crowded. We were in wartime housing. But oh, I was so happy to get there. I danced a jig because it was good to go to the grocery store again, to have a telephone. It was so much better to get water by turning a faucet than going down to that spring and wondering if you would encounter another snake. Strange to say, I think I did my best writing when living in crowded wartime housing in Detroit, first with one child, and later a second child, a baby born in a Detroit hospital. And the poor baby never seemed to sleep long at a time, cried a great deal. So night after night, I'd hear that cry every 2 or 3 hours, leap out of bed. But soon I noticed that after the 3:30 cry meant he was hungry. And after feeding, he would quiet down and sometimes sleep until time to get my husband up and get his breakfast for him to go to work. And I was trying at that time, I had started and wanted to finish Hunter's Horn, dying to finish it, gnawed at me all the time. And I thought, how silly to go back to bed at 3:30, spend time listening for the baby, not go to sleep right away. Why don't I stay up and write? It's quiet now, which I did. So from 3:30 to 6 or 7, I would get in more than 3 hours of good, quiet writing time. Even the traffic outside in the alley, though it didn't bother me, was quiet. Both children and husband slept. So I continued getting most of my writing done at that time. There was not a great deal of time through the day. Sometimes after the older child left for kindergarten, the baby would be asleep and I could sneak in a little writing time, but it would soon be time to get dinner. I discovered you can't take care of a baby if he needs care and write at the same time. It's like trying to cook and write at the same time. You ruin both the food and your writing. But all that, I eventually finished Hunter's Horn. There were no women there whom I'd known down in the valley on the Big South Fork, but they were all gone. I don't think any of them came to Detroit, but there were many other industrial centers to go. And I wondered how it would be to be a woman who had never used gas or electricity or talked over the telephone, or how it would be to live in small quarters, or how they would like the schools. Everything was so different from anything they'd ever known. And I think from my wondering about those, who managed so well down there. They were all mistresses of their environment, but they were now in a new, not only a new environment, but in a dollar economy. And from all that wondering, I think, evolved this imaginary character, Gertie. Many people think the book, The Dollmaker, is purely autobiographical. I did live in Detroit wartime housing, but there all resemblance stopped. I was glad to get back to the city with a great, at that time, Detroit's libraries hadn't been cut down. Near us was a branch library close enough I could take our older child there, our daughter, and she'd have a good time. That was before she started to school, looking at books. I could do the same and select what I wanted to read. It was a busy time. I didn't quite finish The Dollmaker while we lived, and well, we stayed there until after the war was well over. And we bought 40 acres out from Ann Arbor, and I was gardening again. Preserving, canning, jelly making, woo, you name it, drying, even red peppers. And that interferes with your writing. Just as running over the country and trying to be a literary lady does, which I shouldn't be doing.
We honor her for her mind, for her vision, for her courage. And it is a pleasure for me, on behalf of the Kentucky Arts Council, to present to her the Milner Award. Mrs. Arnow.
What I often think about is the growing attitude toward those women who stay at home. The press, neighbors, and others speak of them somewhat scornfully. I've heard people say, oh, she doesn't do anything. She just stays at home. And that woman had 5 children. I think in addition to our working women, we should respect the wives and mothers who stay at home and take care of their children. The dandelions are blooming again. That's
because it's raining.
And the grapes are turning here. Oh, there's a hollyhock.
Yeah, old hollyhock.
It's all crowded, poor thing. I must get in here and clean it out. Too many people never give a novelist credit for her imagination. I had a letter from a woman about Hunter's Horn, and she wrote, if I had a husband like you had, that wouldn't work that way. And poor Harold never chased a fox in his life. I would take a skillet to his head. That was what she said. And so much about Gertie. The first time the book was published, The Dollmaker by Macmillan, the editor saw me. He said, well, I thought you were a big woman. And he was plainly saying he thought I was Gertie. We didn't have much fruit this year and none last year. Couldn't even make pear preserves, but we had a few pears this year. Now what will you do with those?
I'll take 1 or 2 with me on the train and eat them.
These are what, White Delicious?
White. They're the best eaten apples I've ever known.
I don't like Delicious.
They're sweet and juicy. They're really
not
good.
Tart, and they're not really juicy. Oh, you have a lot on the ground here.
Well, as I sprayed them in the spring, I'd have had hundreds of them.
But what happened to them?
I didn't spray and the bugs got them.
And look, the wild grapes are taking the place. The trumpet band bloomed a little, but it's getting too big. And the wild grapes are making it. That's one of the joys of life in the country. See,
Poor old
this is
dead
dying. You never did spray it, did you?
I think I did in the spring.
You said Hemingway didn't deserve Pulitzer Prizes. Well,
No,
who else did?
I misspoke then. I meant Faulkner.
It's not safe to misspeak around me because I always take you at your word, such as my trust and affection that I believe everything you say.
Well, thank you, dear.
Then a month or 2 or 3 years later, you'll say I misspoke.
Actually, it's
Kind of-
especially mistakes to make mistakes like that in front of a TV camera.
Well, you did.
I know.
You mean
I'm
I
very
am
ashamed.
less important than a TV camera to you?
Now I made another mistake, haven't I?
I think we should cease
I think that you're more important to me than TV cameras.
our conversation. If you had your
I finally trimmed that bush.
way.